I think you can grab a seat. We'll get started. It's about 11:15. So I appreciate everybody attending the sessions this morning and continuing to attend this one. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to moderate this distinguished panel of FA representatives, sponsors, and consultants alike. So I'd like to present the following panelists. Jim Lomen, who is the San Francisco Airport's District Manager. Jim has been the manager for the Airports Division in the Western Pacific region. Prior to his current position, he was the Deputy Division Manager for the FAA Alaska Region Airports Division. While in Alaska Region, he also held the position of the Airport Program Specialist, responsible for airport improvement program eligibility, programming of grants, and was an airport planner for the bulk of the airports in Alaska at one time or another. While in his role as a planner, Jim was also responsible for the management of the National Plan Integrated Airport Systems and the development of the Airport Capital Improvement Plan for Alaska. Jim has been with the FAA since 1990, when he left the Army Corps of Engineers in Fairbanks, Alaska, and went to work for the FAA Airway Facilities as a project manager. In 1995, Jim joined the Alaska Region Air Force Division, where he worked until May 2015, when he moved to sunny and warm California. Next, I'd like to introduce David Cushing. David has served as the manager of the Los Angeles Airport's District Office since 2011. He first joined the FAA in 1996 in the Airports Compliance Division in the Office of Airports in Washington headquarters. In this capacity, he has investigated formal complaints and drafted final agency decision documents with regard to AIP grant assurances. He has developed policy in compliance and advised Congress and the public on issues associated with airport compliance, operation, and business affairs. Prior to joining the FAA in compliance, David worked for the Division of the Aviation for the state of Kansas, where I also heard he's a kicker or something. So, happy to have you here. Next, I'd like to introduce Lorraine Pearson-Jones. Lorraine is the assistant manager at the FAA Phoenix Airport's District Office, a position she began in March of 2014. Her specific responsibilities include oversight of the grant programming, grant performance, environmental compliance, and airport compliance matters. Lorraine came to the Airport Division from FAA Regional Counsel's Office in LA and brings over 15 years of experience in environmental, enforcement, and administrative law. She obtained her Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Baltimore and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Forestry and Wildlife from Virginia Tech. Next, I'd like to introduce TJ Chen. TJ recently joined Sacramento County Department of Airports as the department's Chief Administrative Officer for Planning and Development. TJ embarked on his airport career more than 20 years ago as an airport engineering intern with San Francisco ADO, and in the 20-year span, TJ has worked as an airport project engineer manager for Shutmo and Associates, program manager for the San Francisco ADO, and senior regional director for Zodiac Arresting Systems. TJ received his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degree in Civil Engineering from San Jose State University and is a licensed civil engineer in the state of California. TJ is also a graduate of the FAA's Program for Emerging Leaders and a certified member of AAAE. And lastly, down on the left is Mr. Jim Harris, who I'm sure many people know well. Jim has been involved in the airport planning and development throughout the United States for the past 37 years. He brings a wealth of knowledge since before I was born. A resident of the Phoenix area since 1978. But yeah, the key is though he looks young, looks very young. Ages well. A resident of the Phoenix area since 1978, Jim is currently the president of Coffman Associates, a nationally recognized airport consulting firm specializing in airport planning and environmental services. Jim has served as a project manager for over 250 planning assignments at various air carrier and general aviation airports throughout the United States, including over 120 airports in California, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii. A graduate from the University of Nebraska with a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering, Jim is a licensed professional engineer in several states, as well as a member of several professional aviation organizations, including AAAE and ACC. Jim first became a member of AAAE in Swahi in 1981 served on the board of directors as a corporate representative from 1990 to 1998. So, like I said, I appreciate you attending the session. The goal of this session is to present the grant application process and the expectations of those involved. The process is a partnership, and with combined efforts, working towards the same goals. So efficiency can help everybody. Let's help everybody out with more opportunities to execute grants in a timely manner. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Jim to begin the discussions with the FA.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thanks. So it's not very often that you'll have FAA come into a conference and start out the conversation with an apology. But I'd like to apologize for the challenges that our office inadvertently created last year with our checklist that we put out for grants. I know that it was a surprise to a lot of people and created some additional work. Please know our intention in doing that was solely to try to make the program work better. I mean, we had great intentions, and it didn't quite work out the way we anticipated. And so, for that, again, I apologize for what that did cost. So as we head into this next year, we have tried to streamline the process. And I will say, our goal behind that checklist was to help you be successful, to prevent yourself from getting into trouble. And what we realized is, really, that's your job to make sure you're not getting yourself into trouble. And we can't check everything that is a requirement because there are things that you have a responsibility to do. And so we're not checking up on all of those. But there are some items that, if we do have questions, we may dig a little deeper. So, that checklist we did have had a lot of good information on it, and I'd almost recommend that you hold on to it and use it as an internal checklist to make sure you're doing everything that you should be. So, we have communicated some common goals, I think, for both San Francisco, LAX, and Phoenix. And we're going to be getting into a little bit more detail on the timing of grant applications. And I know we have communicated a expectation of grant applications in by December 31st. And I commend, at least speaking for San Francisco, we were amazed at the response that we received. I was in the office on December 31st, and the buzzer kept buzzing with people hand delivering their grants at the very last minute, but they got in under the wire. And what I will say is that helps us do a better job for you because we're getting that information, and hopefully you're hearing back from us as well. I will say a lot of our program managers are buried because they had so many to go through. So if you haven't heard from us yet, we will be getting in contact with you. But if you haven't heard anything by mid-February from your project manager, please reach out to them and just confirm that they have the grant app and that they're ready to give you some feedback on any changes that are needed. And one thing that we have done across the region is we're now following the FAA's SOP on grant application reviews, which is SOP 6.0. And hopefully that doesn't come as a surprise to many of you, but it's something you can get online, and it's our effort to be consistent from San Francisco to LAX, Phoenix to Honolulu. And so again, you can get that online or talk to one of us after this presentation and we can point you in the right direction. So part of the SOP, here's just a listing of the common requirements for a grant application, and hopefully a lot of this does not look foreign to you. As you scroll down through the list, you'll notice there's a new requirement, Title IV, which actually, if you move the one over to the other side of the V would be a Title VI. So that's actually what we're looking for. So that's a correction we'll make on the slide before you download it later. But again, this is all outlined in the SOP, and that's the advantage of using this SOP. This is something that's being used across the country and provides the detail and an explanation for people who may not be totally familiar with what is required in each part of an application. And then for a planning grant, very similar requirements, reduced submittal requirements, but still very similar. And I will say you probably don't need to provide a sketch for your planning grant, but the other information would be required. Oh, okay, planning grant, we just discussed that, sorry. So timelines and expectations. We are going to get into a little bit more specifics on the actual submittals. And, this, Eddie alluded to this on yesterday, that with our split program and some of the challenges that may come with, we've received 49% of the entitlements and a portion of discretion. We haven't gotten it all. And we're not sure what's going to happen after we're starting April 1st. For the next phase of the program. But just know that by you getting in your applications early, that our offices are working with that information to allow us to start our administrative process. And we've been working together and talking with the region, and we have some strategies in place that even though we don't have all the money in hand right away, that we're still going to be able to move forward, and when we do get all the money, hopefully we can turn it around in a very quick fashion. Because of some of the, will be completely obscure to you, but there are requirements that we need to do that we're going to play a few shell games. And that's probably not a correct term anyway, we're going to make it work for you. And so hopefully, internal accounting adjustments. There you go. That's much better than a shell game. So thank you, Dave. You always keep me out of trouble. So, and the other thing I would comment off of Eddie's discussion yesterday, he talked about being ready for that end-of-year windfall that everyone talked about last year when I first got here. We want to be ready for that money that's coming at the end of the year. That's not something that's going to really happen. I know for San Francisco, we've already identified what we commonly call our dump project. If we were to get a windfall, we've already been working with a sponsor, and I believe that's true for our other ADOs. So be as proactive as you can to move your project and get it out to bid, and don't plan on an end-of-year windfall unless we've already talked to them. And like I said, we've already identified our project for San Francisco ADO. And the communication with the sponsor, that's part is so important. We've gotten your grant applications in, hopefully, and again, reaching out and communicating with our project managers or our planners. But don't wait for us to call you. If you have questions or you want to know, where the process is, reach out to your PM or your planner. We want to have that dialogue. And frankly, we should be talking about 17 projects. We need to be starting that conversation and preparing to have our ACIP meetings. And our goal, we moved up our ACIP meetings in San Francisco to much earlier than we had done in the past, and we're planning to bump that up a little bit more this year, and so that we can start our process for 17 even earlier than we did for 16 this year. So just, you'll catch there's a trend. We're trying to move the program forward so that as soon as the money's available, we can get it in your hands as efficiently as possible so that you can start work in, say, May or June, and have significant work accomplished before some parts of our state have to shut down for the winter. And that goes back to kind of the final bullet is consistent drawdowns reflect well on all of us. We're showing that we need this money in California and that we're utilizing it, and Arizona, and that we're utilizing it, and that we can show to our headquarters and to the region, so they can communicate upwards that we need this money and we're using it efficiently. And that's why we're trying to move our program forward, is that we can demonstrate that we are getting work done and we're not just sitting on the money. So, getting into the expectation of sponsors. We really are trying to work hard with each of you that have your airports to have a solid 3 to 5 year ACIP. And our goal would be it doesn't change in August. It's consistent. But we do understand there's pop-ups, there's emergencies, and we'll adapt to those. But when you want a large project in, say, 18, don't show up in the beginning of that fiscal year and say, oh, I have this $7 million project I want to do. We need to build it into our ACIP, and if we commit to something in 18 now, we'll be ready to help you when that time comes, assuming you have your environmental and all those other requirements done. So we really are trying to encourage airports to plan well and stick to their plan so that we can help you be successful. Again, we're looking for environmentals. Ideally, they should be done a year ahead of time, but at worst case, we'd like to see the environmentals approved or accepted by FAA by the 31st of the federal fiscal year that we're planning to grant. That allows us to really move forward with our administrative process. And again, we're looking for grant applications by December 31st, and that allows us to make sure we have all the information in hand to move forward with programming of your grants and sending it on to our headquarters, but also it demonstrates to us you're serious. You really want to move forward with this. You've gone through the exercise of putting together a grant application. And again, we've asked that bids be ready to be open by May 1st. And this will allow us to, again, move forward with the grant application earlier than we've done in the past. In our office, we had 93% of our grant offers go out in August and September. 66% of them were in September. That's pretty, I'm going to say it. I won't say that. That was disappointing because it demonstrates back to how efficiently we're using that money and how can we tell our headquarters that we need more money in California because we don't even use it for almost a whole fiscal year. So we're trying to turn the tides on that, and we're shooting for over 50% of our grant offers in San Francisco will be going out by May, by the end of May. So that's a huge goal for our office, and we'll have to see what happens, how soon we get the money. But we're working hard, and we need your help to accomplish that. Let's see. I already talked upon the idea of communicating often with your project manager, and the more information you give us, the more we can help you. We really are a partner. We want to work with you. And that's part of sitting down in our ACIP and then going all the way into the grant process. And again, once you get that grant, please break ground, start your design, do whatever you can to get that project moving forward as soon as possible. And please, you ask for the money, get it, pull it back. Put in a reimbursement request. Don't wait for 6, 7 months to do a drawdown. Because then, even though we gave you the grant, it appears you didn't really even need the money to start with. So please start your drawdowns as soon and get your reimbursements in a timely fashion. And then, of course, closing out your grant in a really timely fashion as well. Did I miss any other topics?
I'll just add from both the Los Angeles ADO perspective and some of my perspective from before joining the ADO, because I can remember being back in Washington, and from the moment I was in a cubicle near our planning and programming folks, I knew that Western Pacific and Los Angeles ADO were late comers to the game, and I could hear them. Our colleagues, these are the people who are controlling the money, so it's not just that we're missing deadlines or our programs are we're not competing well for money in comparison to the rest of the country. So when, in fact, we're demonstrating a lack of discipline in this area, and then it also reflects to our drawdowns, it's really hard for us to argue the point that we need more money or that we're doing everything we can to do things right. So there's just sort of a discipline aspect to it. And I would also say that Patrick and I have tried to, and we have made some improvements and they are noticed, but we have to continue, we can't stop. And these deadlines are about showing good discipline with the program. Obviously, when you're putting out so many grants at the end of the year and then you're not ready for the next year, those things are connected, or they certainly seem connected. So whereas we've made some progress with doing better planning, plan ahead, use bid alternates, be prepared when you have build alternates. We can maybe bring a project up from the next year, but we're not going to invent a project in the year and be able to plan for that. It just doesn't occur. And I know that with the LAX ADO, there are many years of past practice that have led to presumptions and assumptions that simply don't exist anymore. And we have to be clear to our partners and our sponsors what the new world is like now. So that's what this is part of. It is because we need to be competitive with the rest of the nation. This is what the rest of the nation is doing. We are the outlier. Not just the LAADO, but Western Pacific, but let's face it, a lot of it's the LAADO. But, so together with us adding more discipline on our staff, and there's some need to do that, and then working with our sponsors, I think we can really solidify these gains and make the last final push to make it happen. And we will be primo in the nation. We'll be average in the nation. Primo.
I won't add too much. I think you two have covered it pretty well. But I think from my perspective, being the newest ADO management, is that we realize that there is a bit of an iterative process when you are presenting applications in December, and then the bids come in perhaps in May. The project description may change a bit from the environmental perspective. But what I'm seeing a problem with is that what you might have talked about at your ASIP is not exactly the same project that you end up building, and that the environmental documentation, project description, the haul routes, the storage areas need to be updated so that our CADX or our EA actually covers the project that you're doing. So I think we recognize that it is an iterative process, and we want to try to minimize that by being well prepared and having your designs, tight before we even start the CADX process, because that's expensive, and we do recognize that. And again, I think my whole theme would be that we should have no surprises. When an application comes in, it should be a project that the engineer or the planner already recognizes and knows the details of, so that there aren't changes. And I know that they do happen, but part of the problem in us not being able to process the grants as quickly has to do with being surprised. So we can minimize the surprises. I think everyone has less pain.
So for me, I was first of all, I was a little bit surprised when Jeff called me up. He asked me to sit on this panel. Reason being was that I was literally third month on the job, being with Sacramento County. Previously, I spent 4 years completely away from the airports industry in the U.S. And I was approached. I was still learning the process from my position about the local process. So with that said, I think most of you understand your local process better than I do. Sitting up here, I just want to offer sort of my perspective, having to work now as a sponsor, previous as a consultant, and also as an airport program manager. Just kind of offer what I see as FAA continue to refine and standardize the process. So I'll offer my perspective. As you can see on the projection, the picture I have is it's a lot of money on the table, and it's a lot of free money on the table. Doesn't mean that money is literally three, you still have to work for it. You really have to work for it. Money's available. It's needed at the airport's level, but still federal funding, and it's still needed. As far as the grant application process, as Jim had mentioned previously, it's part of greater process. All the work really is involved in the ACIP part of it. And this for me, now as a sponsor, is literally the last 100 meters on a mile run. And you're really rushing to get it finished. And the reward is really for you to cross the line. And when you complete the application process, you see the award, which is federal funding. And just kind of offer a few of my other thoughts. Next one is just like everything else, it's a process. It needs to be managed. And part of that is FAA SOP requires a project schedule. From my perspective, is definitely want to extend that schedule to cover your local processes, whether it's how to get on your local city council board agenda. All those are something that can be time consuming in your staff, your consultant processing time. All has some lead time to that, so make sure you build into that. And as far as a sponsor going through the application process, as me learning the process from a sponsor perspective, you have to set some realistic expectations. What I mean by that is expectation from not just your elected officials, but also your appointed officials, and certainly your boss. And that's part of my job, is really manage his expectations so he can report back to the elected officials. As far as manage that process, the airport director and I spent a lot of time trying to understand each elected official or appointed officials, their communication style very different from person to person, and how we communicate and set expectations is really important, and that's probably the most time-consuming part from my level. And once you set that, you also have to, once you have your AIP grant process schedule, you also have to let them know that it's really the processing time. It's not literally submit the application, the money will be made available. There's certain things as a sponsor you continue to have to do. And I think internally, we constantly try to manage the project internally, whether it's AIP funded projects or not. For the AIP grant process, from an internal communication perspective, I try to communicate as clearly as what the project scope is going to be in the grant application process. Deletion additions, I think those are much tougher to manage even internally. Jim and the rest of his colleagues talk a lot about communication, and I think that's probably the most important part of it. I mentioned that we spent a lot of time communicating with it locally, internally, with the appointed elected officials. And another part from my perspective, communicate with FAA is extremely important. Besides the AIP-related projects, FAA look at sponsors as a whole, and not just AIP grant, just part of it. Very fortunately, there's an ongoing project within Sacramento County. We're able to establish a regular meeting with San Francisco ADO staff. That has been very successful. We talk about project-specific things, and also expanded to what is ACIP or what is AIP. That has been very, very successful for us. I think now the ADO is very much open to it. And as long as you're willing to establish one, willing to stay with it, they're very open to having regular communication with the sponsors. Lastly are your congressmen and local congress and congresswomen. From my perspective, being so new, I was able to have, at least at a minimum, have regular communication with their staff members. It turns out that they're the best advocates for your airports. Not really to leverage the process, but really, they really understand the local politics. And really help me understand who are the players in the local politics. who are the advocates for airports, and that will all help you with as you move forward with your grant application process. And lastly is with your consultants. I think we all have consultants out there. You got to set some realistic expectation of them, and also communicate consistently of your expectations. You can't be going left field, right field constantly. You got to set some goals and long-term goals and tactical goals as you proceed, and they can help you tremendously as you move forward, not just manage AIP, but also manage all your projects that are there. And lastly, I mentioned just briefly about managing the process. It really is manage your process. You all know your local process better than anybody else, and managing the process part certainly is part of my job, and that's probably the most time-consuming job, but you have to put in time into it. And truth is, at least from what I learned, is once you're lead, you're it, and there's not going to be anybody. You can look to your left, look to your right. Maybe your consultant can help you. You're it, and they look for you to deliver. And then certainly, which brings to my last point, is it's both elected officials, appointed officials, that look at you as airport directors to deliver. And typically, AIP funding is a significant part of federal dollar that goes to local community. It's very important to them, and certainly, I'm sure it's very important to your airport. And I think once you manage the process, understand the expectations, understand FAA expectations, and I think the delivery part is probably the easiest part. You have done your homework, move forward with everything that you could do. You set a very specific schedule. The delivery part is probably kind of automatic. And, at least from my perspective, what I could see so far is we got an application in. There's been regular communication with FAA, and the outlook for us has been very positive. Certainly expect federal dollars to support some of the biggest projects that's coming forward this summer. And that's all I have.
Thanks, TJ. Well, I was going to present a little bit from the consulting side, and really where the consulting can help out. And as Jeff so kindly pointed out, I've been doing it for a little while, and so I've had the opportunity to be involved in. Actually, my first grant that I ever worked on was, if anybody ever heard of the FAP program, I knew John would raise his hand, so I actually got to see that. So over the years, seen the program evolve and change, but surprisingly not that much. I mean, it's still been fairly consistent. So I would offer one thing is, certainly don't be intimidated by the grant program. It really is a pretty easy process. Jim mentioned the SOP. That's the SOP. It's just a few pages long. It is not onerous. It's not complicated. In fact, it's actually filled with checklists and examples and directions, and it's really simple. So, I would offer that up first and foremost. Become very familiar with it. You'll clearly get a handle on the expectations that FAA is looking for. I would take it a step farther when we talk about the deadlines and recognizing those. And I know Jim and Dave and I have had conversations on this too. And while they have a deadline of December 31st, every group has to have their specific deadline. But I'd say get it in earlier than that. When you start to think about it, December 31st, you're 3 months into the fiscal year already. So start to think about making sure your project is pretty well formulated and all your work is done sooner rather than later if you can, because I'll guarantee you when it comes down to putting the application together and you need to get some questions answered by staff at the ADO, sometimes December 30th or that last week in December, staff can be kind of scarce. So, you're going to be left thinking about am I putting the right information in there? So, again, work on that as early as you can. I can't emphasize that enough. Making sure that the FAA understands and agrees with the projects you're putting in the application. Oftentimes, and again, was mentioned the ASIP meetings. And I think at that point in time, when you're sometimes having that ASIP meeting and you're really, as Jim had mentioned, you're really trying to focus on, the next fiscal year and beyond. You don't want to be spending your entire meeting talking about the project that you should have your grant application all ready and to go by that time. So if you're starting to introduce new projects suddenly into that process for an application you're going to submit and it's not on the ASIP, or it's just something they're unaware of, you're going to find that the conversation is going to be slightly different than you might expect at that point in time. On the applications, again, I would suggest you just include as much detail as you can. The checklist is pretty good. It's going to tell you what really the minimum expectations are. But I know we've had this conversation. If you actually look at the SOP, it doesn't suggest, for example, that you put in your sponsor certifications. And we've had this conversation before. But why not? I mean, if you can get them in there, I would encourage you to do that. Those are the 8 to 10 pages you sign your life away to. But for no other reason, you're going to have to submit them eventually. So I would suggest getting them in there, reading through them again, becoming very familiar with what you're agreeing to. Because, again, they do change from time to time. The one thing that's always a challenge at times, particularly when you go on the website and you're looking for these forms, and sponsor certifications are one of them. You go to the FAA website, they're not there. And I know that's something that they're constantly working on to make sure that there is a single point where you can get these forms. But I think oftentimes you can reach out if staff at the ADO can't help or you can't reach them. Go to another ADO's website. Go to another one. I know Central Region, for example, has a lot of forms on there. You can find them. They're there. Just search around. But get that information in there if you can. Do it early and put it in there, and you'll be well ahead of the game if you can do that. And again, we mentioned earlier, make sure the project is on the ALP and certainly in the ASIP. There are often times you'll find a project which is, you think you've been talking about and for a couple years, but your ALP hasn't been updated, and suddenly you realize that something isn't on the ALP. Make sure you talk to the ADO and get something changed on it. Do something very quick to make sure the project is on there and reflected. But don't, again, once that application is in, it's going to get thrown back if, in fact, it's not there and it isn't part of the projects that have been discussed. The other thing I'd say is make sure you have the authority and approval to submit the application. I've seen situations where the airport staff would submit an application, but it went in directly from staff to the ADO. The grant came back, or grant offer came back. Suddenly, the city staff, city manager, public works director, they didn't even know the grant was coming. And they're getting a call from the congressman's office advising them they're getting a grant, and they didn't even know they were getting it. So make sure you vet the projects thoroughly internally so they know what to expect, they know what's coming down the road, they know what the dollar amounts are. So again, I think TJ's talked about it too, no surprises. Everybody knows what's happening. So again, communicate, communicate, communicate. And I'd be remiss if not pointing out how a consultant can help. You all have tremendous resources in all the consultants that you use. Reach out to them. They can help. Many of you, you're wearing 10 different hats. You've got so many things going on. And you think, how am I going to educate myself on the grant process and get the application done? And, we got a deadline and too many things to do. But don't forget they're a tremendous resource and can help you through this process. And it's not necessarily even all the application, but there's parts and pieces of it they can help you with. There's sketches. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But there's pieces that they can help pull together, writing the project narratives, doing certain things, the detailed cost estimates that the FAA is looking for. Obviously, even though you might not have the project fully designed, the consultants can come up with some pretty good cost estimates for you, certainly far more refined than you would maybe be able to just pull off the ASIP and say that's the cost. It's a little more complicated than that, and I think they do need that information to properly program the map. Again, the project narrative is really important. As you go through that, having the right descriptions in there, they don't have to be lengthy, but they have to contain certain pieces of information so the FAA can accurately describe the project and pass that information well beyond the ADO and the regional office, because it does go to headquarters, and they need to understand exactly exactly what the project's all about. And a well-written narrative can help convey that message very clearly so that the FAA doesn't have to call you up and say, what is this project? What's it all about? Why do you need it? The narrative really does help. And the consultants who are working on your projects can do it very quickly, very fast, and very accurate, and put the information in there that the FAA is going to be looking for. The project sketch has been mentioned. One of the things that I would encourage if you can do is oftentimes just if you have, again, with the technology these days, certainly use your ALP as a base for the sketch. I think it gives a good frame of reference to the airport itself as opposed to a single sketch. Sometimes multiple sketches are necessary, but I think if you can do it in conjunction, put it on the base of your ALP, particularly if you have multiple projects, because then you can kind of get the context of where the project is located on the airport and get kind of the scope of the project pretty well defined that the staff at the ADO can clearly see what you're talking about. And again, the early meetings with the FAA, don't wait. In my opinion, don't wait to that ASIP meeting to talk about your 2016 project. Get in there early, even if it's a conference call. Talk to them about the project. Start working on those pieces early. But if you have the opportunity, get in there and meet with the FAA, visit with them, and make sure you're all on the same page. And with that, I guess we'll turn it back to Jeff to take any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much, guys. This is a great discussion, and I think it added a lot of value. And just a few other things I'd like to just add. So one thing that's helped us be very efficient, or just understanding the SOP 6.0. Review it, come up with your staff internally, figure out how you want to set up your files accordingly, because you have multiple staff working on these throughout the project, and it is usually last right up to the end. So set up a filing system so that it's just placing the final documents in the folder, and when the administrative staff or your staff assemble it, it's one last check, and all those different pieces are there, because the more time that we can have on the efficiency on putting it together, sending it off to the FAA, and not getting it kicked back because there's items missing, I think is extremely important to just helping the overall process move forward effectively. We've heard a lot about the communication, the partnership, and it truly is that. So the more we can work together and have these grants be submitted and not have to have them come back with any other information, I think everybody's going to be ahead, and we're going to start to see hopefully the money start flowing a little faster. So with that,
one quick comment. I know a lot of you have already sent in your applications for San Francisco, and you probably have gotten emails back from your project manager saying, well, you need this, and oh, you need a resolution. Well, that was another example of us trying to help you and protect you. And we realized, we checked with our fellow ADOs and checked with our region, and we in San Francisco were being we were requiring more than we probably should have. And I mean, it's definitely back to what Jim was saying. Make sure that you have the authority to accept the grant and that you're in line with what your county is wanting you to do. But a resolution is not a required submittal with a grant application. And so you're welcome. And then the other thing I would just mention is the reason the sponsor certifications aren't on the web is that FAA is trying to get form numbers, because once you get form numbers through OMB, then you can post them on the web. Without the form numbers, you can't post them on the web. And so we do have the latest sponsor certifications within our office, and I'm sure that's true for the other ADOs. So reach out to your PM if you haven't already submitted your grant application or done your certification, and we can get you the latest forms. And our handbook does describe that it sounds like sponsor certifications aren't necessarily required, that we could send them in with the grant offer. Well, that's going to be changed in the future. We really see the importance of the sponsor certifications and each individual certification being signed. So like Jim said, get them in early, and it's one less thing we have to be chasing around when we're getting ready to send you the money, and then we don't want to be looking for those documents. So that was the only thing I had to
are there any questions? Any other comments at this time that we can entertain?
question that keeps coming up is to itemize and provide backup documentation for how we develop the sponsor administration costs. And typically, I thought that was just a small percentage to cover time and expenses that the sponsor staff might have during construction. And so I guess I'm like some direction as to what the ADO is actually looking for on that.
I guess, Jessica, maybe send me an example of what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah, I've had that twice, so I was just wondering if that was a new hot button that we need to explain.
Not a hot button that I'm aware
New
of.
item,
It might be a
sorry.
hot button for someone on the staff, and we sure can look into that.
Jim, if I could just ask you real quick, what is the email limitation on your system? Because I've had to break them down smaller and smaller to find the size to send. Anything you can do on that? Because more and more pages on the application, the more memory it takes up.
Yeah, that's out of our control.
All right.
Actually, zip files will get stripped off because you might be sending us a virus. So, yeah, people have sent big files in a zip, and our system cuts that off.
That helps us all move things very much more quickly through the system. We've run into situations before where we've done the early bidding. We're still working on receiving the grant sometimes not until August, September, which run into a little bit of challenge just with having that bid and then having that bid held for 4.5 to 5 months by the contractor. So I mean, it's a challenge, and I think airports are certainly willing to do whatever we need to do to best keep the system moving efficiently forward. But I guess you're saying that the goal now is for 50% of the bids to be out in the early part of the summer.
Well, I mean, that's a goal for our office, is that we will have grant offers out, and actually I would like to be much more than that, but depend on the timing of the money. But I guess one comment would be, if you are in conversation with your ADO and you're expecting discretionary, definitely talk to your project manager before going out to bid, because we just never know the timing on that. But on entitlement or state apportionment projects that be coming out of our office, we have more control over when that. We have a better idea when that money is going to be available, and so we're hoping to get that out early.
Cases the entitlement. But I do understand, and I think we're committed to help. And then the final thing is grant performance. Overall, grant performance by the airports, my understanding is it continues to get better. Just comment on that's truth or false?
I think I can take that. I mean, when we look at our metrics, the chart looks better. I think from the LA ADO, I think we're seeing some improvement, mostly we're not engineers, so we started from the beginning, like plan better. And Jim wants to start from the end, being an engineer, meet your deadlines, and reverse engineer it. So we're kind of in the same place anyway. I mean, this is where the LA ADO needs to be. So we're seeing some improvements, but I can't tell you that it's not because of our residential sound insulation program that wags the dog in LA. I mean, that's just huge. We make a little bit of improvements there, and so I don't think we're kind of out of the oscillation factor. We still need to work on this discipline, and there's stuff we need to do internally. And I have to say, geo-balancing, we're all within. I'm the senior guy sitting here. But I didn't have anything to do with geo-balancing. And geo-balancing is the reason why we have Moraine, why I don't have to deal with Arizona. So we have the ability to up our game, but we're not going to up our game if we don't try. So this is where we are at. And it's not just, I can break it down for you guys. We have a limited number of FTEs working on this stuff. When we're dealing with entitlement-only grants in the summer, that means everything is going to get congested, and our performance is going to look bad, and when it's connected to follow-on years, we just can't make a case. We can't do the next level of improvement. So it's all of us together working to make the whole region better, so that we plan smartly. I know with my multiple airport sponsors, I want to get to that project eventually. It's really important for that airport, but we need to plan for it. So we need to be exercising good discipline and hygiene, so that I just feel like we're on the edge of not just things that sound bureaucratic and help us with our charts, but that really bring the whole region up to get at these projects and show some really good work. We do good work in the Western Pacific, and it is known. But I just think we're on the verge of being really great. So that's why I think.
I will say, I'm really looking forward to next year when we're reporting back to you how well all of us have done in accomplishing this. I'm hopeful and anticipating it's going to be a good story.
One other comment, and kind of going off of what Joe was talking about on based on bids and getting grants based on the actual bid amounts. Don't forget too about the independent fee estimates for your consultant services, because when you take the bids and all of a sudden you've got those numbers submitted, but you haven't gone out and done the IFE for say the construction admin costs, that's going to hold up getting the grant out. Same would be true if you're going to do a design-only grant or a planning grant. It's going to be based. They're not going to issue the grant until you've actually gotten the independent fee estimate done. So start to think about that, because that is a process that can take a little time.
A quick follow-up question, perhaps, to what you just said, Jim. In general, when does the 20-year grant assurance period end for a development project, or or where does it start? At the beginning when you get the grant, or when you close the project? I would think it would be the latter.
Really, I don't know why the microphone wasn't coming over to me when the question started. I just want to make sure your question is, when does the 20-year clock start?
Correct.
You know, I feel pretty confident with the recent decision that the 20 years from which the useful life of the project not to exceed 20 years from the date the grant was issued. So, useful life to me, I mean, as long as it's serving the use that the grant was for which the grant was made, not to exceed 20 years. So, unless the Court of Appeals overturns us.
I'm just really curious why you asked the question.
Because he's sitting next to.
The latest iPhone message mentions Santa Monica. I wonder where this came from.
I probably would refer you to that decision. That is the most recent guidance we've gotten about that question. And I was pleased with the answer when it came out. But it is subject to appeal. It is a director's determination. But look, in airports across the country, in every ADO in the land, airport sponsor has an improvement, and it has a new idea. It plans for it early. It's consistent. We get to it. We're not going to stick you with a 20-year obligation if we agree that the useful life of the improvement is expired because you've got a better idea. Because it's supplanted by something better. That's not controversial. It's when there's a complication of doing closure, or there's some other nefarious thing going on. But I would never tell a sponsor, don't come talk to me about your new good idea until I get an opportunity to dismiss it out of hand. But that I'm listening. I'm listening if you've got some ideas. Aeronautical.
Actually, I have a question building on Joe's comment about when can sponsor award contract. A lot of times, sponsor cannot award contract without funds being encumbered. That means have a grant actually approved. So, if with right now there's only a 6-month authorization, there's only 6 months worth of money, and you're asking everybody to open grants May 1st. Obviously, there's not enough money to support all the bids. Is there a plan on the FAA level on prioritized grant allocations? Because it's challenging to have a sponsor hold fiscal year issues. And right, so what's the solution on that at this point from FA's perspective?
Part of the strategy we're looking at is maybe using state apportionment on the non-primary airports to help stretch the entitlements, and then we'll do some, what was that, Dave? Creative counting later on once we get the rest of the entitlements to make sure everything's balanced out. But the one thing, for the airports or the sponsors that have the funds, with entitlement-only grants, that they can be a reimbursement. So you do have the opportunity where you could start a project that is only entitlement only, and as long as you have the funds where you could pay the contractor if we don't get you the funds right away. But we can give you a grant later on that if for some reason the entitlements kind of dragged on and you had the financial resources to make that happen. But right now, when it comes to the primary airports, there's not a lot of opportunities for us to maybe put in additional funding. Maybe if it's a discretionary grant with some entitlements, maybe we can do something. But if it's strictly an entitlement-only grant for a primary airport, then we need to be having some conversations.
So the ADOs know where a project is in the region prioritization for the discretionary projects. We do a national, regional ranking. Well, I don't think anybody's going to tell you you're number 1 or you're number 28, but I think that they could tell you you're not in the first wave. You're going to be in the July time frame. So for those projects that have discretionary, we always say talk to the ADOs, because the ADO staff should be communicating with you. Hey, you're set up for first wave. You better have your bids by May 1, or maybe people that actually have their bids now. We're requesting early discretionary. Goes back to kind of what Jim and Dave and everybody have been saying. The people that went out and already have their bids, some of those people, we're asking for them to get their grants in the first wave now. Program them now, they'll have their grants in April. So, those people stepped up, they're going to get their money. People that are getting, that are farther down, it may make sense for us to tell the onesie twosies, okay, don't open bids May 1st. We want you to open them July 1 because you're farther down and you need discretion. But I think that the realities are, when you figure the people that are getting discretionary, I mean, the size of our program, Eddie had the screen up there, 2/3 of the money is entitlement or apportionment, state apportionment only. So the list of people getting discretionary and getting discretionary after May or June, you're starting to talk about like 20 maybe. 30 people. So it's not a really big group. It's a really pretty small group that we're dealing with at that point.
And I will say, we've asked our project managers to communicate with their sponsors that have discretionary grants to have that conversation. But at the same time, we don't want people to kind of roll back on their heels and not stop pushing. So we want everyone aiming for a bid opening by May 1st, but on those discretionary ones, we will have to conversate. I've never used one, so I don't think I've seen one either.
I've seen several drafts that have been unsent from the LAX ADO over the years, so I think it's going to be a phone call.
Yeah, we're really sensitive about putting this stuff in writing.
I'd like to thank our session sponsors, Morrison Merley, AECOM, and JBT Aerotech Jetway Systems. So we appreciate the speaker taking their time to sit on this panel. And so with that, we will be, there has been a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project, so we have those certificates that we would like to give you. And with that, I'd like to give them a round of applause. Thank you. So then I believe the next session starts after lunch at 1:30, 1:45. Thank you, Joe. Okay. Enjoy your lunch. Oh, and it's.
Just so everybody knows, it's lunch on your own. And again, for the student lunch, it's at El Torito. I know that you RSVP'd for that if you're one of the SWAI members that it will be going to that. But just please, again, the next session starts at 1:45, so that gives everybody a little bit of time to enjoy and try to stay dry when you're out there. But everybody's got an umbrella. That's right. There we go. And there's some umbrellas on the back